Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 30, Section 4, The New Order in the Holocaust. And to start with, I want to talk about a kind of an unusual story. It kind of starts with this man that you see here, Władysław Spilsman, who happened to be a pianist, as you can kind of see, sitting at a piano. But during the September 1st, 1939 attack on Poland, Spilman, who is a pianist, was actually playing on Polish national radio, kind of a recital playing some Chopin, when the Germans attacked. And a lot of people can recall kind of this eeriness of hearing his piano playing basically is kind of the soundtrack for the bombardment by the Nazis. What's weird is that Spielman, who was Jewish, would eventually kind of survive the war, and you're going to hear a little bit about that at the end, kind of the rest of the story, so to speak. But needless to say, this is a man that was going to go through a lot of turmoil before this war would end. And with that, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the laws and the punishments that were handed out by the Nazis as a result of some of the legislation that was passed. So starting with number one, the Nazis passed laws creating a separate legal status for Jews, denying them of citizenship, the right to jobs, limiting their right to work or own property. And this is all part of what is called the Nuremberg Laws. One of the things that was included in the Nuremberg Laws was a requirement of Jews to wear this. It's called the Star of David. It was a patch that Jews were required to wear in public starting in 1935 to denote their status. And as far as like determining what constitutes being Jewish, it all came down to kind of your bloodline. If you had one grandparent that was Jewish by law, you were designated to be like 25% Jewish within the German government. And thus, you could lose your citizenship and you could be basically in a position where you might lose your job. Even if you were not raised as a Jew, you could have been raised as a Christian, but because you had one grandparent, it didn't matter. Along with that, it also denoted some other statuses. And as the war goes on and we start seeing people being sent to concentration camps, prisoners typically would wear one of the following patches denoting what their status is. So even among Jews, there were different statuses among the Jewish population. But along with that, you could see people who were political prisoners, either French, Spanish, even German, Jehovah Witnesses, people who were just, asocial or criminal would get a status, disciplinary issues, gypsies, homosexuals, you name it. So, as a result of these Nuremberg laws and some of the harshness towards Jews, Nazi anti Semitism led to a lot of Jews being deported. Many of them were sent to places like Warsaw after the Polish military had been crushed in 1939. When we talk about the final solution, which we're going to talk a little bit more about here in a bit, this is considered to be the deliberate mass murder of Jews, Jewish prisoners in German control. And certainly, they weren't all just Jews. I mean, there were other different statuses that we've kind of reviewed here just a moment ago, but Jews primarily were the big topic here as far as kind of the full extent of the punishment that the German government wanted to wield. So the final solution forced Jews into ghettos initially, which were areas that were basically confined areas. They were kind of like, I would say, urban prisons is kind of the way I would describe them. They were barbed wired or walled to prevent Jews from leaving this region. Um, Most of the people that were within these ghettos died of starvation or were murdered or in some cases succumbed to disease. Concentration camps were meant to hold enemies of the state. That included people who spoke out against the Nazis. That could be communists. That could be people who were pro democracy. But Jews and other prisoners were forced to work as slave laborers. And when you talk about the Nazi infrastructure, as far as like building munitions, building infrastructure during the war, a lot of times they were really relying on the slave labor because of the fact that able bodied men were probably fighting in the German military at this point. Some of these laborers were subjected to medical experiments. You might hear about a man named Joseph Mengele, who was a doctor, supposable doctor at Auschwitz, who performed all sorts of really, cruel medical experiments on humans, on the prisoners that were in Auschwitz. Some, if they didn't succumb to that, they might have died of severe hunger. So, needless to say, it was awful. You also had situations where the Germans were trying to figure out ways to eliminate um, populations through what would probably be like a pogrom, kind of a mass murder. But at Babi Yar, uh, Germans used a mobile killing unit to massacre roughly 30,000 people within a 2-day period. The photos that you see kind of in the bottom left hand corner are from that event. Um, what the Nazis found out is that it actually took a toll on some of the individuals who were involved in this. And so they wanted to find a way that would be a more efficient way and maybe less grueling as far as the trauma towards those soldiers to eliminate the Jewish population. And so in January of 1942, there was a meeting of Nazi leaders known as the Wannsee Conference. They met, and it's there that they lay out the plan of the final solution. Uh, People that would have been at this conference would have been like Heinrich Himmler. Um, you would have seen guys like Adolf Eichmann, who we're going to talk a little bit more about here in a bit. But at this conference, they laid out the plan to round up and to send Jews to concentration camps and eventually extermination camps that were established outside of Germany. Um, on the map that you see here, those dots that are in the red are those extermination camps. All of them are actually within the country of Poland. So Auschwitz, Sobibor, Treblinka, just to name a few, were some of the more well-known death camps during the war. But if you also notice that there are other areas where you might see other concentration camps, as far north as Estonia, as far west as Holland and France. But even within Germany, you had camps like Dachau and Bergen-Belsen and Ravensbrück. All were camps that were known to have high numbers of people who were starving to death or dying from disease, but not necessarily known as camps where people were sent to be just exterminated. So, going on, Hitler established a special concentration camps in Poland with the main purpose of killing large numbers of Jews and destroying their bodies. Camps like Auschwitz had been specially designed with gas chambers to kill thousands of people every day. If you take a look below, there is an example of the gas chamber, and you'll note that kind of on the side walls there are these grates, and it's through these that gas in cylinders would be put in, and the gas that the Germans used was called Cyclone B. Cyclone B was actually a fertilizer that was developed kind of in the period of time after World War One, and it was actually developed by a German chemist who happened to be Jewish. And what's really sad is that as time goes on, many of that chemist's own family perished in camps like Auschwitz as a result of this um, chemical that he invented, this fertilizer that he invented. Anyway, the bodies of these individuals who were gassed were disposed of in large furnaces, like you see below. What's sad is, when the bodies were found in those gas chambers, usually Jewish prisoners would be the ones who would unmangle the bodies and kind of stack them and go through them looking for anything precious like jewelry, gold teeth, anything of that nature before those bodies were sent to the crematorium or the furnaces. Um, at a place called Bergen-Belsen, when the Allies actually started liberating parts of Germany, the Allies found somewhere around 30,000 bodies and 60,000 survivors. Many of them had been starved or were too ill to be saved. Matter of fact, when the British, who were the first to liberate some of these camps, when they came marching in, uh, the soldiers were ordered to share some of their rations, but at the same time, they were also eventually told not to do that because of the starvation diet. Um, some of these prisoners who would eat that food would get very sick from that because it was just too much too quick. So it's really a real strain to try to help your fellow man, but yet at the same time knowing that if you help too much, it could actually have an adverse effect. When we talk about the Jewish population, really from 1933 till about 1945, before any of this occurs, we have a population in Europe around 9.5 million Jews. After the Holocaust, only 3.5 million Jews are left, roughly 6 million Jews. And if you throw political prisoners on top of that, roughly 12 million people died in some way or another in these camps, which is just unthinkable. I mentioned Adolf Eichmann a little bit ago. Eichmann, who actually was present at the Wannsee conference, in charge of some of these different camps and such. And when the Allies are coming into Germany and the war is winding up, Eichmann is actually captured and he's put in an American camp. But while he's waiting trial, he escapes. And eventually he finds his way to Argentina. In 1950, he actually ends up in Argentina. And within a matter of years, someone reports that he is still alive. And this gets back to people who are members of the Israeli government. And in 1960, they devised a plan to figure out a way to bring Eichmann back to Israel to stand war crime trials. And literally in May of 1961, about 60 years ago, he is kidnapped as he's coming home from work by a number of Israeli operatives who kidnap him. They keep him sequestered for a couple of days within a hotel until they can arrange for an airplane to come and pick them up in Buenos Aires. And he's drugged and literally put on a plane and sent back to Israel, where he stood trial. And in 1962 was sent to the gallows, where he was hung for his involvement in the Holocaust. I mentioned Władysław Spilman at the beginning of your notes here. What's interesting is when the war ends, Spilman actually goes back onto Warsaw Radio to finish playing the piece that he had started at the time that the British or the Nazis had bombed Warsaw in 1939. He survived the war, survived the death camps, and certainly gets the last say. Thank Thank you very much.